You wake up, you go to work, you get home, you sleep. Repeat that cycle every day for 40 years. Do you really feel free? We always crave freedom and what it brings to someone, but why? And what exactly does it mean for one to be free? There are many different definitions. Today, when most people discuss freedom, they do not discuss morality or consciousness. The most basic definition is, I am free because no one tells me what to do, and that is straightforward and easy for everyone to understand. It is the idea of modern liberty, which can be summed up by freedom of movement, freedom of speech, financial freedom, freedom of jobs, and freedom of religion, which can be broken down to fewer obstacles between you and your choices leads to more freedom. Let's imagine two people for a second. This is Bert. He lives under surveillance in a country where the government punishes those who disagree with it. He is bound to a religion, and even the books he can access are limited. He cannot even leave the country. On the other hand, this is John. He can travel anywhere, choose what books to read, choose his career, religion, and lifestyle. He is arguably much more free than Bert. We are not asking if John makes wise decisions or is happy. Freedom in this context is, how many decisions does each person have the ability to make? It is the lack of an external constraint. It is also important to take into account the number of choices available to each person. For example, if you have the ability to pick between more countries to live in, then you have more liberty than those with a smaller range, even if it is easier for them to actually move there. Perhaps the best definition for this is the one by Isaiah Berlin, a Russian-British philosopher who stated that freedom is the idea within which a person can act unobstructed by others. This definition makes an assumption that if nobody controls you, then you must be free. But we all know that that is not the case. For example, while most governments do not control you directly, they possess a state media, which when used selfishly can shape your mind and change the very way in which you think. In Hungary, there was a controversy where a government member responsible for managing education and media sources stated, "The one who controls the media of a given nation dictates who controls the thinking of a nation, and through that, the one who rules the given nation." So I ask you again, are you really free? Propaganda is everywhere, even if it doesn't look like it. You are not immune to it, and every place of media these days wants you to think in a certain way. Everything is funded by politicians and billionaires who want to bend your mind to their will. They want to control you, and they themselves are controlled by the greed of power. None of your thoughts, opinions, or political views were shaped by you exclusively. You are just a subject to the media which you consume. We will come back to this topic, but first we must time travel back to the time of antiquity. Yes, I have a time machine. This is where everything began, ancient Greece. Two of the greatest minds, Plato and Aristotle, had very different views on freedom. Imagine a man with complete freedom, nobody controls him, nobody tells him what to do, nobody restricts his choices. Yet, he spends each day chasing pleasure, status, and wealth. Today, this man might appear free, but Plato would argue that he's a slave to his desires. So the question becomes, do you direct your desires, or do your desires direct you? A deep question at heart, one that has no correct answer as we cannot be sure. And those deep personal desires can still be inflicted externally by others through motivation and inspiration, and most of the time we don't even notice them. In Plato's famous The Republic, Plato describes a human soul containing three parts: reason, the part which thinks and judges; spirit, the part which seeks honour and recognition; appetite, the part that desires pleasure, comfort, and possessions. And Plato asks, which is truly in charge? Each individual decision is ruled by one of the three. Spirit leads to pride, and appetite leads to impulse. And by this definition, freedom is about becoming a person who can decide which desires are dictated by reason and logic. Let's think about the tyrant who controls an empire. In theory, he has all the power he could possibly want, but the more he gets, the more he wants. He may appear powerful, but he cannot control his own desires and is enslaved to them. Not to mention that his power can be nullified by people if they all begin to dislike him. And that's how we have Caesar salad. Aristotle was similar, but he believed in rational freedom, where the key difference between humans and animals is the ability to reflect on their desires. Before making a decision, you should ask, is it good? Is it worth pursuing? What kind of a person will this make me? Freedom therefore comes across as rational deliberation. It was seen as discipline, which is a strange contrast to the modern definition, but in ancient Greece, freedom required this discipline. Imagine life as an instrument. When you learn it, you have little freedom thanks to your skill level, But as you become practiced and experienced, you gain the ability to express yourself in better ways, including the ability to improvise. Freedom. So overall, Greek freedom can be summed up by the ability to govern your actions autonomously without desire and irrational thinking. When Christianity became dominant, Plato's morality argument adapted to bring in the idea of good versus evil, not just desires. It became important to distinguish between right and wrong, and that started new debates. For Augustine of Hippo, a prominent early Christian thinker, the idea of freedom meant giving people the ability of choosing between good and evil. Because if people were only able to do good, then they wouldn't truly be free. After all, this decision would dictate if someone ends up in heaven or hell. This transformed the idea of freedom away from simply controlling desires and towards moral responsibility, the power to choose. Now, in the 17th century, a new movement called the Enlightenment would change the ideas of freedom. This is when people believed that by understanding the world, humans can improve society through reason, inquiry, and science rather than tradition. During this movement, Immanuel Kant asked the question, what does it mean to be freedom in a world governed by natural laws? It is an argument of freedom of will. As in Kant's world, everything followed causality. Events were predetermined by everything that came before. It is the domino effect. Human desires are all determined by upbringing, biology, and psychology, and if everything you do is dedicated towards following your desires, then you are not free as it is driven by external sources. You cannot choose the conditions in which you are born and brought up in, and Kant argued that you are being pushed around by forces inside you like instinct, emotions, social pressure, and personal history. Kant defined freedom as independence of the compulsory will of another, which can be achieved by escaping all predetermined rules and creating your own through reason. If you were to truly act rationally, you would choose to obey universal laws, which sounds contradictory. But there is also a distinction between autonomy and freedom. Kant also explained that actions are praised or blamed because we assume that the person could have acted according to reason as opposed to impulse. If someone lies or harms others, then we should judge them for failing to act as a rational agent. At the end of the Enlightenment, Schopenhauer rejected many of its ideals, which focused on humans being driven by irrational desire and reason being secondary. In short, he was much less optimistic. He made the argument that freedom does not exist in the way we think it does. Acting freely and willing freely are fundamentally different. You can choose to raise your hand or not, but you will never be able to choose the desires behind those actions, famously stating that a man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills. Which honestly sounds like the ramblings of my drunk uncle, but it's not. It's determinism. He believed that our choice is just the strongest motive prevailing, where we can see competing desires inside of us, where one eventually wins. People behave predictably because one's character is fixed and cannot choose their temper, emotions, and temptations. You didn't choose your character, so your freedom is naturally very limited. Nietzsche was less pessimistic. What if the idea of free will was created to make it easier to judge people and control them? Ironic, I know. He raised suspicion on saying that humans are fully responsible, as we are driven by motives outside of our control. You can have multiple things controlling your actions like instinct, desire, fear, and ambition, which compete, but you cannot choose which one wins. So freedom exists through shaping yourself. It is the ability of shaping your drivers rather than letting them shape you. A free person does not follow their habits automatically. They question inherited beliefs, push back against comfort and weakness, and build themselves into something stronger. It is about choosing who you want to become. Jean-Paul Sartre takes the more extreme conclusion and says that everyone is always free whether you want to be or not. You didn't choose to exist. You didn't choose the circumstances of your birth. But within those circumstances, you always had the freedom to choose how to respond. Even refusing to respond is considered a choice, giving you complete freedom. This rejects the idea of captivity. There are no excuses for making bad decisions, and there's no reason to blame fate, society, biology, or upbringing for your decisions. Sartre saw freedom as responsibility. It is about taking ownership of your life where you must ask, what am I doing with the freedom I cannot avoid? For it is in bad faith to say that you are not free. So back to the big question. Are we free? It all depends on how you define it, as different people view it differently, and instead of generalizing freedom, we should break it down into smaller parts, as it's overwhelming. political freedom, psychological freedom, moral freedom, and existential freedom. You have options, you have choices, yes, but there are also things that affect you that you cannot control, and many of those things shape exactly who you are and how you think. I am sure there is drastic change in your life that happened because you were in the right place at the right time. Maybe a game your cousin introduced you to led you to meeting great people in that game. Or maybe it led you to becoming closer to others as it is a common interest. Do you control your desires or do they control you? Do you make your own opinions or do you let biased news tell you what to think without looking at multiple sources? Question everything. Instead of asking, am I free? You should say, what is controlling me? Do you control your desires? Do you control your past? Do you control your biology? Do you control your actions? And you will find the answer in that. Freedom is an attractive desire, everyone wants to have full control, and you should strive to make that happen, yes. But in the end it is a question of fate. You didn't click on this video because you chose it. You clicked it because the algorithm served it to you. But now, you can choose to click on the next one, and subscribe.